Hey everybody, it's Tripl-L coming in on a Tuesday morning to talk about My Hero Academia chapter 280. Wow, 280 and we're still in this arc. But yeah, guys, coming in Tuesday, I was too busy on Monday. Of course, I have the birds with me. And we're going to talk about the chapter. For this chapter, I'm pretty happy with it because it's a chapter of fulfillment. It's a chapter where the things we were talking about previously kind of came to, or like there was a follow-up. There were 3 follow-ups in the chapter, that being the follow-up on Mina's sweat, the follow-up on the idea that Mina and Kirishima were going to have something big going on because of their entangled past with Gigantomachia, which we'll talk about, and we had a follow-up on the whole Majestic point. So this was definitely a feel-good chapter for me. I feel pretty happy with everything going on in here, just because it was neat to see a follow-up on the things that we were talking about, like even 2 weeks ago, especially on Majestic and on Mina's sweat. Now, in terms of what we're going to do for the video, of course, I'm going to do a walkthrough. I got my notes, but first I want to do general notes on Mina because the stuff that happened with Mina was pretty cool and also kind of sad. Just because of the whole freezing and the age regression. So buckle in. This chapter does have other points in it as well. This is a pretty long script that I got in front of me, so we're probably going to be here for like 30 to 40 minutes. So put me on double time the speed and let's get into it. So first, Mina. I think this was really great for the character. It is one thing to say that Mina and Kirishima are going to be doing something in this chapter because of their entangled past with Gigantomachia. It's another thing to get what we got in this chapter where the author really went above and beyond when it came to Mina in particular. So this is definitely great. I don't feel comfortable going into exact details of how something's going to turn out. So I didn't really expect this level of interaction with Mina going in here. I didn't expect for Mina to have like this aggressive of a flashback, but for the people who did expect that there was going to be some callback to the flashback, props to you, Sarge. You said you were calling it, so props to you. Props to you, whoever went that far to say that. That's definitely cool. What Horikoshi did here in terms of calling back to that flashback, it made sense 100%. Well, even the whole thing, how Mina freezes up, that parallels how Kirishima froze up in the first place. This was a nice give and take. This was a nice, Mina did it first, now Kirishima stood up at this point. When it comes to Mina too, like knowing that she froze here, that does tell us that this event with Gigantomachia in her past was significantly more impactful than we could have thought. In fact, when you go back and you look at the Kirishima flashback, when you have Kirishima apologizing to those girls and they're talking about how awesome Mina is, now we know like there is more significance to why Mina was somber or respected Kirishima to some degree, right? Because we know that Mina was legitimately scared, but now to know that it affected her this much probably does say that when Kirishima ultimately apologized in front of her friends, it does say that she probably found commonality within him, and that's probably what helped their friendship moving forward. So really, I loved what was going on in there. It was really tragic to see. Now, in regards to the writing here, it's really important that we look at what exactly happened in 279, because what happens in 279 is important to say why this particular over-explanation of Mina had to occur. And when I'm talking about the over-explanation of Mina, I'm talking specifically about the narration that occurred here, where she is saying that the fear keeping me in place, I gotta melt it away, and she's specifically recalling Mineta's words when it came to midnight. So on the live stream, we were talking about this idea about giving readers time to think about things and then giving readers the answer to confirm whether or not they were thinking. I think it was Master Gray. I don't know if Master Gray is on these videos, but this was a commenter. He said it was like a build-up and payoff kind of thing. So in this particular case, when it comes to My Hero Academia, in the previous chapter, we saw there was a single sweat bead on Mina. From that sweat bead, I extrapolated, well, this probably means that she's putting on a brave face because this thing does sincerely concern her, and she's putting her best foot forward. We come into this chapter, and the author confirms it by having Mina recall Mineta's words. So this is a pretty good follow-through. Now, the reason that the author had to go far in justifying and explaining this, he could have left it at the sweat, but here's the problem. Hero Academia, the target market for Hero Academia are young kids, right? And that particular bead of sweat in that last chapter was really, really small. So we are in a situation there where what the author did is, like, for the people who are scanning the Hero Academia manga and paying really close attention, they'll get some information early on. They'll be able to make the inferences, and then when you lead into this chapter and you confirm it, well, that pretty much rewards any person that went the extra mile to think about this. And it also does say that the author essentially set it up, and this is one of the better things about Horikoshi. He does it many times in this chapter too, how he sets up certain things towards the end. For instance, Seiro setting up that there were people in the fire, then you see Momo, and then also Kirishima. There was that moment where he set up that Kirishima was really close to Mina's vial, and then he has that answer at the end. Horikoshi in particular is very good at setup and then payoff. And think about like how that makes you feel as a reader when you're going in it. Like, think about how nice it is that you can see a single bead of sweat and extrapolate a certain character's behaviors and then have that confirmed. That is a really good feeling. And, you know, when it comes down to it, I think this is a really good technique to have in general. Mind you, for Horikoshi in particular, it does make things a little bit interesting because you can kind of tell what he's thinking dependent on how aggressive of a line he's putting in there. And we've talked about this before. We do know sometimes he has very aggressive lines. He has an aggressive line here in this chapter as well. But at the end of the day, it makes for a really cool reading experience because it makes everything feel like it flows into each other much better. So props to the author. Really, when it comes down to Mina, I think he did a really great job. Now, mind you, I'm pretty sad in general that Mina has such a bad freeze. But Mina didn't wallow in it, and we'll talk about that in a few moments. Actually, on that one more point, when I look at Mina's freezing, I actually kind of wonder if she's freezing for a more significant reason. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because of a particular issue that occurred with the translation way back when. Now, when I'm seeing Mina freeze up, one of the things I was wondering was whether or not Mina was thinking about the ramifications of her actions when she gave Gigantomachia directions. And this is where it gets kind of tricky, because I believe that the translations are different across 3 different mediums. I think the anime has a different translation as well, because I recall doing a My Hero Academia comparison video, and I remember looking at this particular point. But just to show you like where the confusion starts for me, here is chapter 144. And I want you to pay attention to this particular little panel where Mina was helping her friends. This is a fan translation by Fallen Angels. They said, if you hadn't come, we would have been dead for sure. So that's first Mina's friend talking. And then it switches to, I just made up those directions, so come on, we gotta run. So that makes it feel like, okay, well, this is Mina talking. But then when you look at the panel for Fallen Angels, it can't be Mina talking because it's the same thought bubble. What's worse is that when you go and you look at Viz, he would have killed us if you hadn't showed up. You gave him random directions, so let's get out of here now. Viz makes a lot more sense when it comes to that particular thought bubble. And I don't recall what the anime did. But the point here is this assumption of Mina giving random directions to Giganto early on. It's kind of sketchy. We legitimately don't know. When you look at the degree that Mina gave directions in chapter 144, the left of the avenue, the agency is 2 kilometers away. That's not random directions. That's really, really detailed. She even put a kilometer distance on that. I don't put a kilometer distance on that when I'm thinking of something on the fly. You just don't do that. So here's this is a legitimate problem, is because this is a non-important line. And we don't know if the translators, we don't know who's right. Right now, from the way the thought bubble is constructed, it's more reasonable to think Viz is correct. And if Viz is correct, the assumption that Mina gave random directions, that might be her friends thinking it. And her friends, they're not the best at judgment. And the problem with Mina's friends is that we don't know how reliable they are as information givers. So in this particular situation, we're in a spot where legitimately the author could come back and say that, oh, hey, Mina's actually, she realized that she just helped a dangerous person in her past. Like, he could add that in there and it would work. by the Viz translations, there's enough room to make that work. And right now, that's where I kind of stand. I'm kind of wondering, did Mina have an extra response because of that particular part, along with the general fear, just because of how aggressive her freeze was. Anyway, let's talk about the chapter proper. We've already spent a lot of time on Mina. So page 1, this is the color page. If there's ever a color page to use as a thumbnail for Mina is the trader video, it would definitely be that one, because like there's a level of confidence in there. She looks really slick. Kind of unfortunate that in a chapter where Mina has such a tragic incident, it's such a strong color page. It's unfortunate. Like, you see this and it makes you think, oh, Mina's gonna be like amazing here, and it's like, oh no, shit, she's just age regressed. She just became more of a child. That's unfortunate. It set me up, right? Like this page definitely set me up to expect something else, and it feels worse. It makes the salt, like, it rubs salt in the wounds. Another thing though, like, we talked about, I think we might have mentioned this last time, but it's interesting to note that Mina's quirk has grown from acid production to manipulation of the produced acid. We know that the kids' quirks are gonna grow. It's just interesting. It's just legitimately interesting. Mina's doing more things than she ever could before. I'm happy to see these upgrades, but I do wonder what like Bakugo's upgrades eventually going to be, right? Is he going to control a continuous explosion? I don't know. I hope he does though, because that'd be pretty neat. Then we go into page 1, which is an establishment page. We see Seiro, Shimage, and Shiozaki, I think, according to the silhouette. They're in front of the fire. Kaminari is appreciating the lap pillow that Emily is giving him, which makes sense because Emily was the one who was supporting him on his approach. Anyway, if Kaminari has the time to appreciate a lap pillow, then great. For those who don't watch that much anime, just so you know, lap pillows are a big thing for anime boys. They like the idea of resting on a girl's lap. I know, like, anime boys, I don't know what to tell you, man. They're really thirsty for anything, I guess. And Kaminari is part of Mineta's cohort, so it makes sense. But yeah, if he has time to like that, he's probably fine. Anyway, in this page, Seiro also sets up that some people might be in trouble in the fire, and that's followed up on later when you see Momo helping people. On page 4 to 5, now we see Mina's approach, and the important thing here, Mina is telling us her acid is giving her some kind of fireproof quality. Well, it's making the fire more manageable. The most interesting details across these pages are the close-up on Mount Lady holding Giganto's lip, because when I saw the lip being held, I really wondered, like, how does that thing not rip off? Like, she's just holding by the lip. I mean, I would have held by the teeth. Maybe he'll like bite my, he'd probably bite my fingers off, but that's where I would have gone. I would never think to hold by the lip. Props to her, but I'm really surprised she just didn't rip off his face. But jokes aside, in page 5 on one of the panels, we see that the villains also get assaulted by the heroes, and it looks like Dobby takes a hit here, which seems to be followed up on later in the chapter. On page 6 to 7, we have Giganto thinking, and then we have the Mina flashback. Now, with regards to Giganto, it seems like his thought process made sense. There's no reason for him to consider that he would be delayed by everyone. Like, that must have been a shock. What made the scene better, though, is that we see the pupils for the first time, I believe. So, now I'm sincerely concerned, because this does seem like he's taking things a little bit more seriously. I really hope that this doesn't go too bad, because if he's now thinking, like, I gotta squish the gnats, like, that means he's probably going to put in as much effort as he did in running towards Shigaraki. So this is legitimately concerning, because if we say that Giganto was a problem earlier, imagine what he's going to be now that he's focused on hurting people. If I'm Giganto, I'm going to be thinking the most efficient route is to kill everything that gets in my way. Or, you know what, he's calling everything a bug, so let's say squish everything that gets in the way. Like, that makes sense. Page 8 and 9, the Mina regression page. Again, it's a really beautiful shot, and it's a really visceral shot. Anyway, page 8 also features Mount Lady being brutally grabbed. Props for the author showing the Mount Lady sequence so well, and as you'll see in the chapter in a few pages, he kept that sequence going. Anyway, I really like seeing the transition from page 8 to page 9 when it came to Mount Lady. Giganto swung her to the front of him before tossing her, which just is super brutal to think about how her body had to whip forward for us to have a shot of her back, right? That's pretty brutal to think of. The most unfortunate thing here, though, is that the anime probably isn't going to show the motion between the frames, given what they did with the Mirio and Overhaul fight. If I recall, the fandom was calling it My Slideshow Academia during that period of time. So this is going to be pretty unfortunate. This is definitely one of those shots where I would love to see the motion happen between the two keyframes, but given what the anime's done before, probably not. Like the last time I hoped for them to do the animation between the keyframes, we got what they did with Meteor and Overhaul, which was unfortunate. Anyway, page 9 is an even more heartbreaking page, kind of, because like it shows Mina trying to recover, and there is a really high level of vulnerability here, seeing Mina like against the arm or like the palm of Gigantomachia, like really vulnerable. Really good moment. Like page 8 and page 9 really do a good job in just showcasing how bad this got for Mina. There is a level of weakness here that is not very easy to replicate in a general spread. And you know, when I'm looking at this page, all I'm thinking is like, thank God that kids in Shonen Jump don't develop PTSD unless they're plot relevant. We go to page 10 and 11 and we have the Kirishima save. The most interesting things here are, one, Kirishima's pose. It was just kind of weird to see him come out of the fire sideways. Like I really expected to see him in the same orientation that Mina was in. And at this page, also take note, Kirishima's hand is really close to the vial that Mina couldn't catch, which the author did use this shot later. Secondly, we see Mount Lady hit the ground face first in the bottom panel, and that sucks. That just shows us where we are in the timeline. And then one last thing that I want to ask you guys, is Kirishima in Unbreakable here? Because it looks like Unbreakable, but I've always had trouble recognizing when he's Unbreakable and when he's just hardened. So let me know. Also, as you know, I love the idea of Giganto being Crimson Riot, and I just want to point out that Kirishima's mask has those pronounced fangs underneath, along with some fangs on the top. And you know what? Who else has fangs on the bottom lip? Gigantomachia. You know, like, I'm just saying, it's a passing observation. I'm not saying that Giganto is Crimson Riot. Oh wait, no, I am. That is my big bet. You know, if one of the next if like in 3 chapters we have a chapter titled Crimson Riot, I would be pretty over the moon. You know, if the author just comes through with that would be swell. But you know, might also be wrong. I'm at, you know, chances are I'm more wrong, but I'm really holding out for Giganto being Crimson Riot. Anyway, page 12 to 13, the author continues showing where Mount Lady is, which I already pointed out. Mount Lady, her transition across these pages tells us this happened so quickly. Anyway, on page 12, we find out from Tetsu that Mudman is one of the reasons that the fire is going down, and we get an accolade for Kirishima that even though the situation was more dangerous for him than Tetsu, the guy was going head first and going even faster than Tetsu. So that just, to me, says that Kirishima was really invested on getting there in time. Like, maybe he already knew Mina was there. Who knows? I hope I'm not forgetting something. On page 13, we see Giganto standing. We see that Dobby might be hurt. And we see that it looks like Toga stops the one hero from getting them. At the bottom of the page, we see what looks like Kamui Woods and Mount Lady. In regards to Kamui Woods, I don't really know what's happening with him in this shot. Like, I think he's face down, but it's kind of hard to say. And it seems like there's roots beneath him, so maybe he was able to break his fall. Honestly, really hard to tell. Page 14 to 15 has Kirishima having his big moment. Now, in this double spread, we see Kirishima piercing Giganto's hide. It's interesting, but this doesn't properly tell us how thick or how hard Giganto's skin is. What Kirishima piercing Giganto tells us is that if a material is as hard as Kirishima's and has the same force behind it or more that Kirishima's arm does when he does the swing towards Giganto's arm, the thing could penetrate. That's all the information we really have, because we don't really know the other variables here. Anyway, Kirishima says out loud that he's Red Riot and that no one behind him is going to bleed. And it's like, okay, one thing, naming yourself. You know, I feel like if Giganto wore Crimson Riot, you know, naming himself could trigger stuff later. But honestly, that doesn't really seem that possible. I don't think the author put that Red Riot line there to trigger memories in Gigantomachia. I think it's just, this is more appropriate when you consider the Kirishima flashback. Him reaffirming his identity naturally flows from the flashback if he's also recognizing who Giganto is. And given that Mina is involved in this, this is most certainly following from the flashback. And then in regards to no one behind him is going to be bleeding, well, that may not work. Honestly, like thinking about it, that may not work. Kirishima may just have set himself up for a tragic failure and then rumination on a tragic failure. But in this case, we could also say that as long as the kids that he's paying attention to aren't hurt, he will have accomplished his goal. But it's like, it's really sketchy. For Kirishima to get out of this without feeling bad, the people behind him, specifically Ashiro and Tetsutetsu, need to come out of this okay. It's just Kirishima does not have good odds because he is quite literally a little strawberry against a giant monster. Page 16 to 17, we have Toga putting in the extreme work, doing extremely skilled things by breaking Kirishima's can. Did I say his name right? Yeah, Kirishima's canister. And yeah, that's terrifying. Anyway, these pages, wonderful shots, and there's a nice message there for Mina. Her efforts were not in vain. At page 17, the medicine gets into Giganto's mouth and it cracks, at which point I want to add an amendment to last week's quick talk. I missed one way of applying medication, and that being putting medication under the tongue. Because that is a nice compromise. Things that go under the tongue get into the system faster, they get into your bloodstream faster. Now, the reason this is just significant is just because we gotta talk about what exactly is going on with Momo's plan here. Later in the chapter, Momo mentions that Giganto moving will make the sedative work faster, which confirms that there's a time component here, and that makes me think that she's potentially going down the digestive tract. Like, she's thinking that the medicine is going to get into Giganto's stomach as opposed to soaking into his bloodstream. Whatever happens, though, we can say it will be the most convenient thing to happen for the plot. Whatever Horikoshi needs to happen, it's going to happen, and he has enough ways out in this particular situation. At the moment, though, I am expecting a moment where Momo's like, it should be working by now, and then Giganto's just like, nope, because he has some kind of immunity. Then pretty much cue Attack on Titan episode 1 for everyone in the area. But yeah, no, like Momo giving the time component has set up a thing where she is expecting for something to happen and it never comes. So that might be very interesting to see it on page. Page 18 does something wonderful. It shows the turrets that Momo built, while also informing us that Momo is in the fire and forming Majestic. So first, let's talk about Momo's power and other alternatives to this particular situation. When you see her like making a giant turret, you're thinking, oh, Momo, could you not have done anything else to like stop Giganto? For instance, could she have made like a bunch of trank miniguns, and the miniguns just fired like a bunch of little tranks at him? So, you know, you have that wonderful little moment like where they do it in Looney Tunes, where Giganto is covered in tranks that are going into his skin and they're like pumping him full of drugs. You know, could Momo have done that? You know, she has the capability to make that kind of stuff for sure, but this is where we reach the limits on Momo's computational ability. See, Momo probably can't go off spec. And when I say off spec, probably means she can't go off. It probably means she can't legitimately create her own things. I feel comfortable saying this because when kinematics get involved, things become a lot more complicated. And kinematics just refers to the behaviors of objects in motion, right? If Momo was to make specifically some gun that could launch multiple tranks at Gigantomachia, new things become problematic. For instance, she has to be able to properly model how the tranks are going to fly in the sky, because Giganto might require new conditions. He might require the needle to be particularly stronger. Then Momo has to change the size of the dose, and then that changes the size of the bullet. Then she has to calculate how the bullet is going to travel through the sky. How much force does the bullet need to have coming behind it, and how hard does the bullet need to be to not break while it's being hit by that force to push it forward towards Giganto. Because there's so many new formulas coming into this, Momo probably can't make off-spec solutions like that. She could probably make off-spec if it doesn't require kinematics. Like if it was just something as simple as getting like a giant, getting like a giant needle canister kind of thing and then jabbing it into Giganto, that's probably a lot different than relying on this object to go and fly through the air in the way that they need to. Now you might say, but Momo is a genius. She can remember so many things. She could definitely do the formulas and manufacture new things. I would say no. The reason being because Momo took around the same amount of time that it took Izuku to calculate that one calculus problem way back when. I think Tokoyami even made a comment that Momo was taking a little bit longer on that calculus question. That wasn't a hard calculus question. That was a calculus question that if you know the identities, you'll be fine. So given that as a standard, Momo's computational ability probably doesn't extend to actually calculating formulas. It probably just extends to memorization and regurgitation. which just makes the whole situation harder. Momo legitimately could make a lot of cool things, but a lot of the things that Momo already makes are the products of trial, error, and testing. If Momo was to make something that is entirely new, she doesn't have the time to go through the trial and error process to make it work the way she needs to. That's probably why she has to stay on spec. Anyway, that was just a long talk on Momo. I always like talking about Momo. You know, she's the girl that can make night vision goggles. She could definitely make a gun that could fire tranks at Gigantomachia, but chances are she would need too many custom materials, and once you have them flying through the air, the custom materials aren't going to behave the way that they should be behaving. Okay, on page 19, we have confirmation of who Majestic is, finally, as he brings heroes. And of course, valuable to know that he's bringing Gang Orca, the Shiketsu guy, and Fat Gum. Anyway, this felt really good. Previously, Midnight invoked him, and then I was wondering, you know, does that mean he's going to show up? And, you know, it was ultimately, we didn't know in what manner he was going to show up. Was he going to show up as a flashback for Momo? Was he going to show up to help Momo? Was he going to show up to help Midnight? We just didn't know. Now, my hypothesis from that chapter was predicated on the idea that he was going to have more scenes because his design took longer to make. And for me, like, my hypothesis makes sense if he has more scenes than Ojiro's teacher, but I am legitimately hoping that we do get like a close-up shot of his face in one of the next chapters, just because that will kind of confirm what was going on there. Anyway, Majestic leading the charge towards Giganto makes sense because Majestic was the first option Midnight considered. The fact that Momo is relying upon him now when she needs Giganto to be moved a lot does make sense, because ever since Midnight invoked his name, it did say that Majestic would potentially have something to do with Giganto, or he could do something with Giganto. Now, we do know that the size is a stipulation here. We do know that he might struggle with the size, but given that he's moving people around with his rings, he probably could move Giganto's body around to some degree. He can't fully stop Giganto, but he could probably definitely move it. So everything is consistent here, and I'm glad that the author brought this up. The big thing that you have to take away is the fact that Midnight brought up Majestic means he's a viable counter or a viable interactor when it comes to Giganto. Then on the Giganto side, we see something strange, like the chin rocks have come up, and it reveals more of his distinctive chin. And the question is, why were the chin rocks obscuring his face? You know, why were they covering that jagged butt chin? By the way, you know, this is just an aside. Do you know who else wears face masks that cover his chin? Crimson Riot. You know, might he be hiding a very distinctive facial feature behind that mask? Maybe. Might he be hiding a hideous face, much like Shoji? Maybe. Is Giganto about to start headbutting everyone with hardened hair, and he wants to cover his eyes so that there aren't mangled bodies irritating them? Well, that one's a bit of a stretch. Like, honestly, I don't know why he's covering his eyes, but, you know, he seems like he's getting battle ready. If he starts headbutting people, I wouldn't be surprised. I have no idea why he's doing this, but, you know, just keep that in mind, that Giganto and Crimson Riot do have similar taste in covering their chin. And then finally, page 20 and 21, and this is another wordy page for me. So let's begin. When I read this page, my first question was, why would you add that stipulation here, Endeavor? And for me, the answer is obvious. Like, the author was being really heavy-handed on this. The author needed to force Shigaraki into talking about ideals. And, you know, this is my personal opinion, but I felt Kirishima's stuff, it's super organic when you take into context his flashback. Like, it makes sense. But Endeavor's line, it felt a little bit too much. It felt inappropriate. Gather up all the power you like, but without ideals, your hollow destruction will never bring us. So if Shigaraki had Stain level conviction, are you saying that Stain could potentially bring you down if he amassed that power of destruction? I mean, like, I'm all for being humbled by your experience with Stain, but in what world do you criticize a villain for not having ideals behind his destruction? When I was reading this, it really sounded like Endeavor was giving Shigaraki constructive criticism. To even stipulate that there is a form of destruction, that is, a destruction with an ideal behind it, that form of destruction could potentially bring down heroes? To even imply that is kind of insane, especially considering how many heroes have died by Shigaraki's hands. It hasn't been an hour, and there's a giant body count. And I know this isn't a translation issue because the fan translation agrees. In that case, for the fan translation, they said, "We will never yield to destruction without conviction." And, it's just like, why can't we just say we never yield to destruction? Why do we have to put that stipulation in there? Why do we have to invoke an element of doubt? Why do we have to say that there is potentially a way that this could work? Why do we have to imply that there's a way for destruction to win out? But yeah, for me, like the answer is obvious. It's because we need to provoke this particular dialogue for Shigaraki, which takes us to Shigaraki and what he says. And there's levels here. First, Shigaraki is quoting his father. All right, okay, Shigaraki, I know like those are newfound memories and you like them, but it's just really interesting how much your father is influencing you. Kind of feels like you're an easily influenced kid. But yeah, the rhetoric itself that he's quoting from his father is really unfortunate. You heroes hurt your own families just to help complete strangers. Dad told me that. This is the rhetoric of a hurt child. This was Koda's rhetoric. Remember that kid? How much he hated heroes because his parents were killed in the line of duty. And then we saw how he kind of changed his perspective when he was the complete stranger that was being helped out. The story of Hero Academia itself has already explored this particular rhetoric. We already understand this particular dilemma. This is not a new dilemma. We understand it. For me, when I'm looking at this, and I'm looking at Shigaraki, I'm not going to be swept up by this particular rhetoric. Here's why. Shigaraki's father's hurt comes from the fact that Nana had to separate from him to keep him safe. She later dies. Okay, so unfair abandonment is the issue. Families have to live on without one person that so selfishly decided to help a stranger. The family didn't want to make that sacrifice, but they were forced to make that sacrifice. Shigaraki's father was forced into sacrificing his mom. This plot has also been explored in our world. It's a captivating plot because it's a legitimate tragedy that occurs. Let's just change it around so you guys can get a better sense of it. You firefighters hurt your own families just to help complete strangers, for example. We know that this would happen. We know that firefighters go into dangerous situations. Are we going to hate firefighters because they die in the line of duty saving someone from a building? No, we're not. We're going to recognize that it's unfortunate, but it's not going to work. It's the same thing with the heroes. It's the same basic line. These people are helping strangers and they're dying for it, or their bad things are coming about because of it. Well, it's unfortunate, but what are you going to do? Are you just going to let people die? Are you going to deny people that put themselves on the line the right to a family? And it's worse because like in Hero Academia, if heroes aren't there to help strangers, then we would end up with people like Muscular killing a kid like Koda. I feel like if we're going to pick a fight with someone, it should be the villains that provoke a response from the heroes. It's not someone's fault that they died because they went up against a literal mastermind in the case of Nana. Now you might say, but Trip, society produces villains. We need to change society. And I agree that society should be utopian where everyone is taken care of. But how do we get to that utopian society? And in this particular line of thought, that's being kind of fair to hero society. Because hero society is still so young. So recall, Nana abandoning her kid and dying was directly because of the man that ushered in a period of chaos, all for one. We know how bad Hero Academia society was pre-All Might. Although, like, honestly, it couldn't be that bad given that running away to America was a viable choice for All Might. But regardless, we all know Japan was absolutely like a trash heap. All for one in Japan, absolutely worst place to live. So we'll go back to Japan. Hero Society was born as a response to people like All for One who decided to use their power for their own gain. The first heroes were vigilantes who stood up to fight for what was right. So stopping the heroes doesn't stop the problem of villains when you consider that heroes specifically came out to stop the villains in the first place. The reality is that My Hero Society fundamentally sucks because it's a society that creates the need for a surplus of heroes. And the reality is, I think, you need the heroes there to safeguard the peace for society as society gets the time to improve. Now, mind you, the problem here is that if society experiences too much peace, too many people get too lazy and stop trying to improve themselves. But really, we do need to have a safe location for people to be able to focus on getting better. And I think society probably can't improve by reverting to violent lawlessness. When it did revert to violent lawlessness, what ended up happening was that the villains took over. And to that end, society is not going to improve by bombing cities the way that the Paranormal Liberation Front wanted to. So what all this is to say is that if Shigaraki is starting his speech with this is the premise for his speech, Oh, this is going to be a good one, guys. This is going to be a good one. I am expecting some kind of half-thought thing because that's consistent with Shigaraki. Shigaraki like goes like halfway through his thought process most of the times. And honestly, I want to hear about Shigaraki's ideals. Like, in my opinion, he's only now recently stepped outside the shadow of his master, but he's still standing on his master's shoulders. It's only because of his master that Shigaraki is where he is right now, like quite literally. In every possible way. There's so many levels to that statement. In every way, Shigaraki is just a product of his master. So I'm very excited to see what his ideals are. We all know he has a really strong thing for destruction, but I really want to see how that's changed. Now, there is value in Shigaraki having that line in front of Endeavor. I mean, Endeavor did hurt his family while he was a hero, but it's important to note, Endeavor didn't hurt his family because he was helping strangers or for the sake of strangers. Endeavor hurt his family because he was obsessed with beating All Might. The rhetoric does not land 100% for him. And similarly for Izuku. Izuku shouldn't have a mind-blowing conclusion or realization about this because he already knows how his lifestyle can hurt people thanks to what he went through with Kota, knowing Kota's backstory, and also because he's aware of the fact that he's already worrying his mother. So Izuku shouldn't be having a strong realization here. In fact, Izuku should be hearing this and he should already have like arguments from the time he was with Kota about this. And like if it comes down to the darkest point, Izuku just say like, well, if I don't risk myself to help strangers, villains are going to kill a kid like Kota. Very simple, very simple. It shouldn't be a dilemma. This is not a dilemma. This is only Shigaraki mimicking the words from his father he doesn't even fully understand. So I'm very interested to see how the author is going to handle this, because I think the author is purposely making Shigaraki a half-baked thinker kind of thing. But yeah, it's also very interesting that we're looping around to the idea of Shigaraki having ideals, because this is something that Stain called Shigaraki out on, that he didn't have any. So it'll be very interesting to see how he's changed compared to that first interaction with Stain. Anyway, that's it. Hero Academia chapter 280. I got 50 minutes recorded. Holy crap. I will try to cut that down, but it was a really good chapter for talking. What am I thinking for the future here, guys? I want the chapter title Crimson Riot. I want Gigantomachia to say something that only makes sense to Kirishima, and then Kirishima's like, shit. And then, we're like, whoa. Because that would be cool. Like, Giganto doesn't need to be Crimson Riot, but, like, I'm really betting for it. In terms of what's going to happen next, well, it's interesting because we've swapped back over to Shigaraki, which indicates that we're probably going to deal with Shigaraki. Maybe Giganto suddenly shows up at the last page, because in this chapter we did see Giganto putting the villains somewhere else. He might be planning something. To some degree, I wonder if Giganto would just try tossing the villains towards Shigaraki, because I thought that would be funny. But yeah, it's really interesting because, like, I want to see Majestic do stuff. I want to see him get one shot at the very least. But with Shigaraki there, it's tough. If this really, like, going back to Shigaraki, like, really puts it in a weird spot. Maybe, we do a chapter with Shigaraki, then the next chapter, it ends with Shigaraki and all his villains showing up, and then we go into a flashback of how all the villains showed up. Like, it might be that right when Shigaraki screams out his ideals, all the villains pop up behind him. Like that one time where Shigaraki was yelling at the villain bar, and then all the Nomus popped up behind him. It could be something like that. That kind of imagery. That'd be fine. But yeah, also worth noting that Shigaraki's cracking up there. So that's definitely the incompatibility, the 75%. That's definitely 75% getting to him. I am happy about it. I hope they fit. Actually, you know what? I had a point. I really kind of wish that Endeavor invoked his inner hawks here, because there is no time to just let Shigaraki just sit there. I think really they should burn Shigaraki's eyes out, cut off his hands, probably. Maybe even kill him. People don't like that. People don't like that being suggested, but weighing the pros and cons here, like, Shigaraki's probably going to go on to kill a lot more people. I feel like letting Shigaraki go on to kill like 20 more people is going to suck. You know, I'm pretty sure if Shigaraki ever kills one of the UA kids or even one of the Class 1A favorites, like if Shigaraki were to ever kill Todoroki, or I'm sure like a good chunk of fans are going to turn around and say like, we should have just killed Shigaraki from the get-go. It'll be interesting. It'll be interesting. Endeavor's being too much of a hero here, I think. That's my thoughts. Here's where you're really hoping that someone could be more like Hawks. Anyway, guys, let me know what you thought down below. And until next time, I hope you have an absolutely great day.